kind of impact they've been having, and how those align with the objectives they had when they set out to create this important forum. I've been doing a little bit of preparation for today's panel, reading a little bit about the background of juvenile justice and child welfare in Massachusetts, and to a certain point, we had a lot to be proud of. I think the 1990s were a very difficult time for child welfare across the country, particularly in the juvenile justice area, which really sort of, I think, led to the kind of work, collaborative work, that members of this panel engaged in over the past several years. But as I was looking online, I found an article of a training related to this particular work, and I thought, wow, that room looks really familiar to me. And I realized the training happened in this very room more than 2 years ago. So it was kind of cool to see that Wheelock College was involved even before today. To lead this off, let me first do quick introductions. To my direct right is the Honorable Amy Nectum, Chief Justice, Juvenile Court of Massachusetts. To her immediate right is Ed Dolan, Commissioner of the Massachusetts Probation Service. To his right is Commissioner Peter Forbes of the Massachusetts Department of Youth Services. Next to Peter is Mike DeCita, Deputy Chief Counsel of Children and Family Law Division. And to his right is Russell Johnston, Senior Associate Commissioner from the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So, as you can see, this panel is really a representative of sort of a network of state agencies that work around the welfare of children and families. I also want to say that we regret that Commissioner Linda Spears from the Department of Children and Families was unable to join us due to family illness. So to lead us off, I'd like to ask Commissioner Forbes to speak for a few minutes about the Child Welfare and Juvenile Justice Leadership Forum, just to sort of set the context for our conversation, the concept of a collective impact notion behind this, and the objectives of the forum.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon. It's Friday afternoon. Is anybody here from DCF? We're going to have to give them a hook to get them up here. So be prepared. So I have a couple. I'm just going to try to set this up and try to build off of what David presented. I do want to thank David Chard from BU and for hosting this, and John Zaff, who has been a thought partner of my agency. We've been working with John now for probably about 3 years or so, off and on, doing soft consults on the whole positive youth development, engagement, and all of that. And I think BU has been more than just a host. They've really been a thought partner on the leadership speaker series that probably about 15 or so of you have had the opportunity to go through. So they're not just hosting us, they've actually been working with us substantively on trying to improve outcomes for kids in Massachusetts. I want to thank everybody on the panel for taking the time to come out here on a Friday. I know getting out of here is going to be tough. And I also want to recognize the people that took the course and went through it. And I know who some of you are, but that was a really big commitment, and I hope that it was a benefit to you. And that's one of the things that the Leadership Forum has done is sponsored that speaker series where we've had national folks come in kind of across the child welfare, juvenile justice, race, positive youth development, kind of that thread, which is a big thread. We've had a whole bunch of people come in, and today's training was on implicit bias. I think it's okay to say that now. Our partners include, I'm just going to go for about 2 minutes, don't worry about it. Our partners include the Juvenile Court, everybody that's represented up here, probation, CPCS, DCF, DESE, which has been a very positive partner to have, the nonprofit service providers that are represented in this room and beyond, the Children's League, CFJJ, and others. A couple of my thoughts on this. One of our operating principles has been trying to figure out the whole, people talk about state agencies, in the concept of silos, and to a certain point, that's okay. Because I think part of what's come, from my perspective at the Leadership Forum, is we're gonna do some things together as agencies, like this, and, mixing it up with each other. And then we're gonna go back and we're gonna do a lot of work, and I think this is actually, Ed, in one of the conversations, really kinda helped me conceptualize, you don't have to do everything together. That's really not what it's about. But to the extent that we have some shared vision, we're gonna go back into our own agencies and do the bulk of our work, actually, daily work is gonna take place in our agencies. So that was really helpful, and I'm sharing that. We've obviously picked up the level of communication, gotten to know each other better. And one of the things, for those of us that have been around, a lot of us in the room have, is, when you're gonna really actually kind of like get the system to do better, there has to be some institutional trust. And you don't walk in on day one with that. You have to kind of earn it, spend some time in the room, and through trial and error become more trusting of each other. And I think some of that has emerged here in Massachusetts. One of the examples that I've used, and I actually stole it from Bob Gittins, was he used it years ago, was if you think about the juvenile justice system as conceptualize it as an assembly line, and I think of Toyota. We don't really think of ourselves as producing an end product, but we're actually responsible for the output. We're all responsible for that, and to the extent that everybody that's represented on this panel does a good job, it doesn't mean that we have good system output. So the Leadership Forum is actually an opportunity for us to try to focus on how to synchronize our activities so that we have better output, which is really, for Toyota, it's profit, good cars and profit. For us, it's good outcomes, good long-term life outcomes for kids. And that's a tougher one to measure, because you have to hang around for a long time to kind of be able to pick the fruit off that tree. So that really, I think that's, I wanted to share that. And so I actually have an African proverb that I picked up. I was watching a show. I didn't Google it or anything. But it says, if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. And we're taking on, we've been talking about positive youth development now for, at least in my agency, or in our agency, probably for 12 years, I would think, somewhere around there. And we're finally getting much closer to operationalizing it, but positive youth development is just like this huge construct where young people are viewed as assets to be developed and not problems to be fixed. And that shift is, it's like getting out of that correctional headset and getting into a social work headset. From a juvenile justice standpoint, that's like a little bit of a leap that we've been taking for quite a while. Racial and ethnic disparity, and I think that, one of the things that's buried in it that's really helped me has been the concept of fairness, and that if the kids of color in the system don't think that this is a fair proposition, then they're not going to learn from it. They're not going to invest in it. To the extent that they do think it's fair, they are going to learn from it, or they have the potential to learn from it and be better off. So we have to get beyond all of us thinking that we're fair to get to the point where our customers perceive that we're fair. And that's another leap. That's a much tougher piece, because everybody in this room goes to work thinking I'm fair. But if all the people that you're working with don't think you're fair, then you're really not getting where you need to get to. And it's a huge deliverable for us. And then really looking at, so the third bucket, positive youth development, racial and ethnic disparity, kind of road testing ourselves for that. And then really looking at the interface between the child welfare and juvenile justice system. And that's a piece of work that's going on nationally, has been going on for I'd say at least 10 years, the Robert F. Kennedy Action Corps is represented in the room. There are a number of nonprofits and organizations that have taken a look at how can states do a better job on that pathway for kids that are touching the juvenile court, touching the child welfare system, and touching the juvenile justice system. Sometimes all at once, and sometimes, not all at once, kind of broken up. And how can we do a better job? I mean, clearly the research is there that says that if you're abused and neglected as a child, you have a much higher correlation of becoming a delinquent. We know that. That's pretty solid. So how do you kind of interrupt that and disrupt that? And that's a piece of work that we've been focused on with DCF, but it's a bigger issue than just us or DCF. I mean, CPCS. There are a lot of public agency partners and a lot of nonprofits that are kind of swimming in that lane. So it's complicated, and I'm not sure what the end game is, but we're really trying to make progress, and having you guys fill this room up today, I think is really very positive. So I'll stop there.
Thank you for the sort of great intro. It's good. It does make me want to then go to the other members of the panel, though, and ask this fundamental question. And it's, if you all did those things on your own, paid attention to those three buckets that Peter described, why wouldn't things just work? In other words, why did you come together to do this effort? And why did you stay? Like, why have you kept at it, is the question. So, I don't know who wants to start. Great? Yes, Andrew.
Well, first, let me just say good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for your long and gracious hospitality at the school. And appreciate the leadership education that we've had, the forms education for the number of weeks, and appreciate all of you that have attended. I know you've taken time out of your day, and acknowledge my team as well, and Judge Ahern, who is here, has been coming and is a leader in our court as well, amongst our probation and others that are part of the court department. But we all work together, and to answer your question is, we can't move forward or resolve the bigger issues involving children and families alone. And the courts have a role, probation in our courts have a role, the Department of Children and Families and Commissioner Spears Group and Council and DYSA all have a role. But we touch the whole child and the whole family. And in order to make those changes, and those changes together, we have to work together. For us, if we're going to make some changes in the court, which I can talk about later, we want to make sure the attorneys are on the same page as we are. We want to make sure the community understands where we're going. And you said that, I think in your opening comments, you said that we weren't in a great place in the early 90s. Well, in the early 90s is when the juvenile court was officially established. We've been around for hundreds of years, but formally established, and that's when we started to change, and that we became a specialized court. And we're the only court department in the country that's a statewide court. Most other juvenile courts are run county by county. And the judges and people that practice in the juvenile court are specialists. All of the judges have practiced in either child welfare or juvenile justice. So these are people that are committed to the well-being and to outcomes to children. I'm not giving you a lot of information, but I think that we are collaborative because we have to make the changes collaboratively in order to have those results that we all agree on for children. And the Leadership Forum is really the first in the nation as well. I've had a chance to speak nationally to groups on this, and we've become a model for other convening juvenile courts who handle child welfare and juvenile justice, because we know that we have strength in our voices together. So we're proud and of work we do, and we really like each other. So we really do. I'm sorry Commissioner Spears in here. She's wonderful, and we really have a strong voice together and are open-minded to the possibilities together.
Who would like to go next? All right, Ed.
We'll do things in order because we're a system.
It's a simple line.
Yeah, simple line, right. So anyway, so I also want to add my, appreciate the opportunity to be here, and appreciate that you folks are here on a Friday afternoon to hear us. So I don't know how many people in the room, you know, how did we all get together? So, you know, we're all used to doing business one-on-one, you know, probation with UIS, certainly with the court, or like to see you, or DESE. But we were all hoodwinked by Josh Dillon. So we were either forced or tricked or anyway, but anyway, we all got in the room.
Who's conveniently not here.
Yeah, conveniently not here, right. I think I bought his used car, actually. But anyway, so, but I think it was an opportunity, as has been said, and I want to actually leave space for these guys, but, you know, we're all in the kid business. We all share, they're the same kids, you know, the kids that are either in the system or in danger of coming into the system. We all share, I think, if you know, met us one by one and asked us, it's all about the best interest of children, all about the best interest of kids. I think we all moved past the idea that we just wanted to reduce recidivism because they're children, that's not enough. The best interest of kids is to thrive, and so positive youth development was a framework to begin to sort of do that work. And, you know, Peter alluded to it, it's sort of been a powerful piece for me, is that you know, we're a system, a progression, or whatever, but the real key is how kids experience us. And that's really the piece that we want to manage, how kids experience us. That's how kids thrive. That's how kids have better outcomes. You know, it's the child development, it's the, you know, the neurological development, you know, it's kids developing, you know, like, you know, flashback to all the trainings I've had, but flashback, you know, kids develop, you know, socially, emotionally, intellectually, physically. And so we're all in sort of the human development business. And yeah, our kids have challenges and, you know, pluses and minuses, and we have to meet them where they are, but this was an opportunity for us to come together to pick off some areas, Peter mentioned them, and figure out how we could come together, each putting on the table our contribution to that experience to produce better outcomes for kids. And so that's a sort of super high level summary, but, you know, we get down into the weeds, looking at baseline data, what can we put on the table, what can we as probation put on the table, DYS put on the table, own, to try to collectively improve that experience for kids and improve that future for kids. And that's been the thing that, I don't know, brought us together, besides Josh, and it's kept us together.
Thank you, Dean. I'm sure that many of you know that's what CPCS is. We're the public defender agency for the state, and our responsibilities include representation of children in juvenile delinquency, juvenile justice proceedings, as well as children and parents in child welfare cases. So in response to the Dean's question and what other members of the panel have mentioned, we think that, you know, the value of coming together is a reflection of the roles that we all have at both the micro and the macro level. It's important for all of us to come to appreciate the importance of what we all do individually with individual kids, and for all of us to recognize the value that we bring on whether we're working in schools or in the courts or in other contexts. One of the values of us coming together is for us to develop a greater appreciation, greater understanding for the work that's done by our teams working with people on an individual level. The Massachusetts Constitution enshrines the notion that we are a government of laws, not of people. And while that, from a lawyer's standpoint, is extremely important to live by, and it's important, as Peter mentioned, to get to the fairness issue, we want to make sure that in order to achieve what might be best for children, that they perceive the process as fair. We also know that it's not simply a matter of applying laws and rules blindly, that a lot of what goes on in individual matters involves give and take between the actors involved in the lives of children and families. So we have to develop that sort of trust that I think we're working on at an agency level, at the individual client level as well. And then in addressing the systemic issues, we need that perhaps even more, because there are even more ambiguities and uncertainties about how to bring about the systemic change that we want to achieve, both with respect to the issues that Peter mentioned, kids who are dually involved, the the tremendous concerns that we have about racial and ethnic biases in our systems. So I think coming together gives us a greater appreciation for the work that we're all doing. It gives us a better ability to see and understand how each team, each part of the assembly line can and does contribute to what we hope is a successful outcome, and again, helps us develop approaches to address some of the more systemic problems, the ones that require looking at things from the 50,000-foot level.
I actually think that we summed it up pretty well. So I think about how many times we've had to break through just even acronyms that are just to speak the same language, and that's been really useful. And it's not only what happens in the forum, but actually the connections that the forum has led to beyond it. And so the way in which we as agencies are working together more collaboratively outside of the forum, I think is really a byproduct of the forum.
So, can I just add that it is so crucial that we have the education piece and the commitment from the Department of Education, because so much of what happens early on with these young people is what will affect their future, whether they fall into the juvenile justice system or whether we can spotlight or highlight issues at home that might require some preventative work in home or families to avoid a child welfare case being brought before the court. And it's just been a remarkable partner, and I just want to say that education is, we couldn't do this without the education voice.
Yeah, so I want to give the mic back to you, because I want to ask you about crossover. I mean, you all talked about the importance of collaboration, but give us an example of how crossover between the courts and the Department of Children and Families, how does that work? Like, what does this collaboration look like?
When we talk about crossover, we really mean crossover youth that are in juvenile justice and child welfare. So that oftentimes we see young people that are acting up at school and then come into the system or running away from home and then get into some more difficult troubles with the law and then find themselves in court. And then we find, as we look deeper into a family, we may see that there are issues at home which may prompt a child welfare case. So there's a number of initiatives across the state and really across the nation that work on intervening and providing detention, alternates to detention, and providing some services up front for these young people. As a judge, we see all the juvenile justice cases and child welfare cases, and we have the benefit of sort of a global view of the family and be able to provide some resources in that regard. But the child welfare cases in Massachusetts are up significantly, and the delinquency cases are down significantly. But the child welfare cases have given the courts a real opportunity to decide on what's going to be the best policy, practice, and procedures. And as the Chief Justice, it's my privilege, my responsibility to determine what is the best practice in our courts, how we best handle the work with our young people. And so we're changing, and I can talk a little bit about pathways. I don't know if you wanted me to talk about that. But I think Commissioner Nolan said something about what's important is how the young people experience the system. What's also important is how families experience the system. And we're looking at that differently now, not only in Massachusetts, but nationally, in that we are looking to more of a prevention model. Before intervention, we're looking to find preventative ways in by way of permanency. So what we're creating in Massachusetts is a system called Pathways, which just what it evokes is different pathways that a young person or a family can travel given their obstacles in their life, whether it's substance use disorders, mental health, it might be homelessness, poverty, a combination of all. The judges now in the teams, the multidiscipline teams, representatives from every department and agency here are going to meet in case management teams and determine what is the best pathway for a young person and the child's family to move through the system. And that is about
moving cases that are less complex through quicker than cases that are more complex, because the trauma that a young person feels, even 1 hour away from their homes, is extreme. And the literature and data regarding that upheaval is pretty powerful, and most people in this room that work in this area are aware of that. So we're looking to minimize the trauma that families and children face, and we're hoping that this new procedure, new policy, new practice, thinking about embracing the family in its totality and how we can provide resources to those people. So I know that and I don't want to rush it, but you talked about obstacles down the line, and what prevents us is of reaching some of our goals, collective goals, and that is the resources in the communities, and finding the right and proper resources that support these young people and their families in order for them to thrive. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, it's helpful. So this
yeah.
all sounds terrific. I know that collective impact projects are measuring some outcome, and I've heard you talk about fairness, about reducing racial inequities. You've talked about, someone mentioned recidivism. What are you measuring? And are you doing it collectively? And what's the justification for continuing this, I guess is my point. And whose job is that? Too many questions?
Good question.
And who would like to jump in? Peter, maybe you would like to.
Yeah, one of the things that it comes up on a regular basis, and Russell's on the right corner here, is education being a very important, obviously a very important deliverable for young people, for lifelong success. And again, with the Leadership Forum, there are some things that we can do together. Desi, under Russell's leadership, did an unbelievable presentation on DCF against a lot of social indicators, education cross-referenced by social indicators. I'm calling it that. I think that's accurate, and academic indicators. But the social piece is really compelling to me, and how basically how kids that are in the child welfare system struggle on education. You know, so education's huge, but at DYS we have like our own way of looking at that based on the young people that we're touching and we're serving, and we're looking at, you know, things that you, if you came over and ran DYS, you'd want to know how many kids got their high school diploma last year, how many kids got their high set, which is the GED in Massachusetts. We're digging into how many kids complete the 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, how our kids match up on MCAS with the Massachusetts population, general population. So we have, you know, we do an annual report, and 8 or 9 pages is all data on how our young people are benefiting. You know, one of the things that we've, with the, in Massachusetts, the age of juvenile court jurisdiction went up in 2013 from 17 to 18. So more and more kids that are able to graduate high school. And we actually have kids that are presenting at intake with high school diplomas, which never happened before. So we have to have a post-secondary strategy, and we're doing a lot of, we've been doing a lot of work on that. Renee is our education director, and so that's another example of where we're doing some things together, but we're doing other things back at the ranch, trying to make sure that we're crunching out the best possible outcomes for the kids that we're serving, that we're delivering a high quality educational program. So that's like probably the easiest thing to put forward is measuring education. Some of the other stuff is tougher, but you know, one of the things that, you know, kind of at a macro system level, you know, building off of the judge's comments about dual status, you know, the kids in the child welfare system are just nationally disproportionately minority kids, and they move through the system, and there's a percentage of kids in the child welfare system that come into the juvenile justice system. So to the extent that Massachusetts is effective looking at that particular juncture in the system, if we can do some creative, innovative work there, we can disrupt some of the disproportionality that moves forward and try to make sure that kids are getting services closer to where they need them. So some of the work has to be done together, and some of the work is going to be done back, I'm calling it back at the ranch, but back in the agency. So I think that in order for the Massachusetts system to really be the best in the country, we have to stay at the table together, and we all have to do good work in the agency. You know, just on the measurement piece, staying on that, you know, some of the things that we're struggling with, you know, around that are very relevant, you know, is behavioral health. You know, how do you know if someone succeeded in behavioral health? You really don't get to check the box that they're all set. Family engagement is one of the things that we've struggled with. You know, we really want a family voice in the system, and last year, in 2018, calendar 18, we were having a hard time figuring out, okay, how does positive family engagement look? Is it visits? Is it parents showing up for treatment meetings? Is it visiting hours? What's our strategy? But what's the measurement? And what you really want to try to get to on the family side is you want the family to acknowledge that a trust that you have their child's best interest, right? So that's really the metric, is trust. I think for all of us. So we did, you know, more qualitative surveys of 117 parents, like a pilot. We were doing it off of computers at program locations for families that came in. And there were 2 questions in there about trust. And the overwhelming feedback on those surveys was that they actually trusted the people that were working with their child, that they had their best interests at heart. So I guess the point I'm making is some of this stuff is really hard to measure. And that's why we need guys like John Zaff, because we might not have that talent in the agency to be able to measure some of that relational stuff, and then some of the other stuff is a little easier.
I think one other piece that these conversations have pointed out to us is that we need to do better at collecting and analyzing data as well. I mean, I think there are some of us who are further ahead in the curve than others. We at CPCS know that we have to do a better job of analyzing and collecting and analyzing the data that might be available to us, and we're working on developing a new case management system that will allow us to do that. As I think Peter's mentioned a couple of times, it's not just at this table. It's back on the at the ranch.
At the ranch.
At the ranch. But in some, you know, our ranches, our neighbor, you know, we have ranchers who are neighbors too. So I think, you know, we've had some conversations with Russell about the significance of his data for our clients. And so we are, even if they're not conversations that involve the whole group, those are important data collection and data analysis conversations to have. I think Peter's spot on with respect to some of the challenges associated with identifying what we want to measure. From our perspective, one of the most important outcomes for us is that level of trust that the individual lawyers develop with the lawyer-client trust, and how much can the client appreciate, respect, and understand the work that the lawyer is doing. That's certainly not something easy to measure, but there are some proxies that can be used to identify alternative measures for those things. You know, the amount of contact that the lawyers have with individual clients is one example of that. That's not a guarantee that you'll have a good relationship, but obviously if you're not having any contact with your client, that is a guarantee that you're not having a good relationship. So there are substitutes or proxies that we can use for some of this. Another place where we're seeing the advancement on data collection is our work with DCF, which unfortunately Commissioner not here right now, but we're part of a task force that's looking at some of the work that DCF does with reporting data to the legislature and the public. And I think because of the relationship building that's going on at the Leadership Forum, my sense is that this is an easier conversation to have when we're posing questions to the department about, well, can you collect this? Well, have you looked at this slice? Well, what about analyzing this based on race, or based on gender, or based on sexual orientation? Are there ways you can collect or analyze the data? And I think the fact that we have these relationships that are still in development, and you know, we don't always see eye to eye on everything. We sometimes will have, you know, disagreements, pleasant disagreements with each other. But I think the fact that we're able to sit in the room and have the conversations, have the disagreements, makes it easier when we, makes it more likely that others will view us as a trustworthy partner and come to be more willing to come to us as someone who can contribute to solving a problem that affects the youth that we all work with.
So, perhaps we jumped in too deep too quickly. So I'm gonna ask you to step back a little bit, because I'm a classroom teacher, and I'm now running a college that where the faculty want to prepare professionals in positive youth development. So now we have folks in high-level positions who are doing positive youth development. Help me understand what that is. And why wouldn't it always be positive? And why is this new? Why is BU now talking about offering a positive youth development program for young professionals?
Do I have to take that?
So it's Josh Stone again. So all roads lead back to Josh. But no, so I think, I go back to, getting past, reducing recidivism and wanting kids to thrive. And I think, it's borrowed from the child development literature. Kids that feel safe do better than kids that don't. Kids that have, health care and behavioral health do better than kids that don't. Kids that have access to education, kids that have access to a supportive adult in their lives do better than kids that don't. And the research, the literature is replete with those, not everybody, but those kids by and large that have that kind of stability, both the Maslow hierarchy, do better than kids that don't. And so it really became the system. It's funny, we're all in a this is sort of like exposing myself as the nerdy bureaucrat, but we're all sort of locked into producing results that can be counted and funded and and all of that. And so those are really our outputs. But the impact is kids who feel safe, who have get the appropriate education, who get the appropriate medical and behavioral health care. And those are really it's those impacts that really produce the healthier kids with better outcomes. And one of the things that we have done, one of the things that sort of helped us find our way was adopting a framework of results-based accountability, results-based leadership. And the idea is that we picked off these 4 categories, 4 areas, collected some baseline data. Mike mentioned not necessarily easy data points, but there are proxy data that we can get. How are our kids doing educationally, and what's how are we doing in terms of our impact in terms of racially, ethnically, and gender, and then what can we all put on the table and contribute to changing that data, to bending the curve, as we call it, in the results-based accountability framework. But it allowed all of us in our roles, in our agencies, where we are, organizationally, to put on the table and own, okay, we'll do this, we'll do it this much with this quality, we'll produce these outputs, and then, collectively we'll see if that produced positive impacts for kids. And we'll measure it through proxies, through educational achievement, through permanency, legal permanency, through the impact that we have on reducing, racial and ethnic imbalance in the system.
You just said it at the end about permanency, if I can jump in, and this is, in fact, the reason is the collective impact that we're together, is the collective impact that we can have on children and in families, and that's why the courts have to focus on legal permanency. When we do have these cases in courts, it's our responsibility to pay attention to the time that these cases and the data that instructs us as to how long a case has been in court, so that the rules that we updated our rules, our child welfare rules in the fall of last year, with a focus
on less time spent in court for families and children, and a closer watch on the timeliness of legal permanency, and really looking to legal permanency, and legal permanency meaning the child returns home, or the child is free for adoption, or there is a guardianship. And so many of our young people are in that sort of floating period where they're not in legal permanency and they're waiting for that permanency. And it's difficult to have positive youth outcomes and positive youth development unless a child feels safe, as everybody has mentioned, and in a stable, permanent legal home. And so the judges and the courts are committed with our partners to ensure that we achieve that legal permanency for young people and their families. And that's why we're launching this Pathways program, so that we collectively can work on on the focus, and at the end of the star on this is the permanency for young people so that they can thrive. That's our line.
Russell, I wanna.
Oh, sorry. Nope, you can go.
Did you just want to add to that?
No, I'm long-winded.
Russell, I want to jump down to you and ask about what role schools play in this, and how DESE sees itself as part of the success of this kind of. We heard a lot about the school to prison pipeline, was sort of the narrative that went around for a long time, but how does DESE think about positive youth development, and what's its role in sort of changing the system for children?
Absolutely, and not unlike my colleagues, I think we're sort of data geeks at the department as well. But it's always sort of those stories and those moments that stand out to you in your career where you really see the school to prison pipeline as it actually plays out in the lives of children. So a few years ago, I had the opportunity I go to schools a lot, and I was in a school on the southeast part of the state that was involved in turnaround and doing some great work to transform itself and to become a very new learning experience for children. And so I couldn't wait to talk to the children themselves. My son always tells me that I have bad breath. So before I bend down and talk to children, I always put a stick of gum in my mouth, and I'm bending down and I'm talking to children in this school, and I'm asking them, what's different this year? The school has transformed, and I want to hear from them about what's new, it's exciting, what they're learning about. And to a child, regardless of what grade I went to, the children told me the difference this year is that we can talk at lunch. And it took my breath away, because they were telling me that last year, the school was so out of control that the only way that the administration felt like they could control the school was to invoke silence at lunch. What an undignifying experience for a young person. A few days later, I went to a GYS facility in the central part of the state, and it was great to see the staff there, and they were very enthusiastic about the program. And I asked them, tell me what I need. I put a stick of gum in my mouth. I said, what do I need to know about your program? And they said, it's mealtime, Russell. We want to show you the cafeteria. And they took us down to the cafeteria, and the tables were round, and they said, what we'd really like to do is to be able to have family-style meals and pass the dishes between the young people who we have the privilege to serve here. And we actually don't like your nutrition policies necessarily that require one child to have one meal. We want to be able to serve with bowls and plates and platters so that our young people can experience a dignified mealtime here. And I think about just that experience, that one little vignette of like, children should not have to go to be incarcerated in order to experience a dignified social skills building experience together. And that's the work that we have to do to disrupt. And what's the commonality between those experiences? It's institutional racism. It's the way in which our educational system is playing out what it was designed to do in so many ways, which is to maintain the institutional racism of power. And so my question for my team at DESE is, how are we disruptors? And I love that Commissioner Forbes used that word disruptor earlier. And a lot of it for us had to begin with a journey of professional learning. How do we learn to get better at having race-based conversations? How do we, as the state education agency, develop a racially literate approach to our work? And by doing so, we've actually been able to impact where I think some of our key levers are. And while I could talk your ear off about those levers, I'll just mention 3 to you. So the first is really monitoring. One of the key roles that we can play in the state is, by our design and by our requirements, is that we need to be in schools and districts providing monitoring around things like special education and civil rights, those types of areas. And our team, by doing this work of having and building our work and having courageous conversations, thought deeply about, well, what does that mean as we are monitoring schools and districts? So for the first time, our monitoring team is able to have a data snapshot that they review before they work with districts around civil rights and special education issues. And they actually practice having courageous conversations. How do you speak truth to power before you go into a district and speak with a superintendent about equity issues, particularly about racial equity issues? And so that change in practice hopefully will lead to a change in outcomes for our children based on this idea of disrupting the school to prison pipeline. In addition, our assistance work would be the second lever that I would mention. As a state education agency, we provide a lot of technical assistance, professional development. So our lingo for positive youth development is positive behavior interventions and supports. And so our PBIS model is something that we do a lot of work around, but actually going a little deeper than that. For the very first time this school year, we are offering training and deeper than that, a professional development series for educators from across the state, particularly involved in our turnaround schools, focusing on culturally responsive practices. What does that mean? And I'm very excited that we have one of the foremost authorities in the nation, Zaretta Hammond, working with us. And so just this last week, she does conference calls with us and comes here and does in-person PD with our school and district leaders and my staff, who actually go to the trainings as well. And they were telling me, like, oh, Zaretta told me this, or I heard this from Zaretta. It makes me so excited to hear the way in which those culturally responsive practices are building themselves into the approaches that the schools use. My final one, just briefly, is around data. And we produce a tremendous amount of data as a state education agency, but how do we use the data? How do we make sure that it's meaningful? So some things we do because we're required to do them. I don't want to make it sound like we're so altruistic and we just get out there, we are leading the way. Sometimes it's laws that require us to do things, but it's how we do them that I think matters. So Chapter 222 required us to rethink the approach to suspension and exclusion in our schools. And so one of the things that we've done as a result of Chapter 222 is to start a project called Rethinking Discipline, where the schools that have the highest rate of discipline, if you think about the school to prison pipeline, discipline is where so much of it, I think, is stemming from, although low expectations is right up there in my book. But the schools with the highest discipline rates had to come together and rethink their approaches to discipline. And I recently had the privilege to listen to the principal of Fitchburg High School, for example, and their transformation in terms of how they are using much more positive approaches, much more restorative practices, and really holding themselves accountable to say it's not acceptable that we would exclude this many young people from our campus, and really thinking about the consequence of it and owning the consequence of it, and then also really celebrating the progress they're making. So it's a drop in the bucket. There's a lot further to go. I'm not going to sit here today breaking my arm, patting myself on the back about the progress, but there is evidence of light and hope in this work that makes me think that we can make sure that no child has to have that undignified experience that I told you about at the beginning of this, and we can do better for kids each and every day here in Wisconsin.
Great example.
Can I just piggyback on that a little bit, and that this new, many of you know, there's a new criminal justice bill that was the crime bill reform that was passed recently, which talks about the school-based offenses, and they are now no longer delinquency offenses, which is another break in the school to prison pipeline, that there were some school offenses that were being charged as delinquencies and brought before the court. So we no longer do that, and we know that it's better that kids are going to act out in school, and it's important that they stay in school. That also allowed the new crime bill allowed for further diversion programs, judicial diversion programs, as well as diversion programs before they even get to the court. So this school to prison pipeline is a very, very real circumstance, and one that we are in this state and across the country are looking to break that. And Massachusetts is doing a number of things in that regard to help that.
So I think that's great that Chief Justice Necton pointed out the diversion work that's being done. One of the ways to help achieve the best outcomes for kids, if you're looking at it in the positive youth development framework, is to minimize the extent of the depth of their entry into the juvenile justice system, into the child welfare system, and in many cases to keep them from entering these systems at all. I know that everyone here at the table is looking for ways to do that. One of the things I think Chief Justice Necton mentioned earlier with respect to her permanency, she mentioned the importance of families staying or keeping families together or reuniting families. One of the best things that we can do is through the addition of more community-based services and through better supports that kids and families are getting in school systems to keep families from even entering in the juvenile court system in the first place. I think that's one of the things that we could do that would have the greatest chance of success at improving outcomes for kids, all kids of color in particular. So I think that's one place that I think we could really make some further progress on. Chief Justice Neckham also mentioned trauma. This is one thing that I think.
You're getting in good with me.
Thank you. I agree with her on everything on this front. So we have, I think, as a state, and I think nationally too, become much more attuned to the importance of being trauma-informed, trauma-aware when we're working with kids. The Hippocratic Oath has long taken in medicine, doctors have long been charged with, above all else, do no harm. And I don't know if we have always been aware of the potential harm that our interventions can cause for kids. It was tragic to see what was going on at our borders last year with kids being removed from their families. But we have in many respects the same sorts of trauma going on in our backyards, not just at our borders. And I think the more we are trauma aware, trauma informed, the more likely it is that we're going to keep kids safe in their own homes, in their own communities. And that can, I think, in the long run, not only strengthen those individual children, those individual families, but also improve communities, which in the long run is something we all really have to do a better job at. So I think kudos to Chief Justice Necton for pointing out the importance of us being trauma-informed and trauma-aware. So, and I know that all of us are trying to focus on it. We, as Russell said, we need to do more, we need to do better, but I think one of the things that bringing us together does is that there's some forced accountability here. If we're gonna talk the talk, we gotta walk the walk, so.
I'm wondering if you could share what your greatest obstacles are, what challenge, either things you've faced and overcome, or things that remain challenges that all of your agencies are working on to try to overcome that.
Can I take this one first? The risk of hogging the mic. When we see kids in trouble, whether they're in trouble in the juvenile justice arena or in the child welfare arena, it's easy to look to short-term solutions. It's easy to respond by thinking, what do I need to do right now to address this immediate problem? It's harder to look at longer-term outcomes and think about what kind of impact is the intervention that we're about to undertake going to have on this child, this young person in the long run. So from our perspective, I think one of the biggest challenges is being mindful of safety issues, both for the community and for the individual child, while at the same time being mindful of the long-term ramifications of what we're doing. And when we see stories in the media about horrendous crimes being committed or terrible things happening in families, it's easier to move quickly and jump in. And again, I'm not suggesting we don't need to protect communities. I'm not suggesting we don't need to protect children, but we also have to be mindful of the long-term impacts of what we're doing. So I think for me, that's one of the things that's challenging, trying to get us all to stay focused on both the short-term and the long-term. Other comments?
One of the things that I was going to comment on earlier on the Pleasant View development, so two challenges for me, really inside the agency. One is for all of us, I guess, receptivity, because we're dealing with teenagers. We're dealing with teenagers at DYS that are with us against their will. So we have to have engagement strategies, and we're doing a lot of work, and I keep pointing to John Zaff. I mean, America's Promise put a piece out called Don't Quit on Me. I read it, I've read most of their stuff, and there's a piece in there about constructive criticism, and actually getting young people to listen to you is a lot more difficult than just showing up. You gotta kind of earn that through establishing a rapport, and that's a big piece of our work. And then the related piece of that is getting staff on board, workforce implications, and Ed actually touched on recidivism. And so that's like the classic juvenile justice, criminal justice metric. Do people leave and then go out and commit more crime? And what's happened in Massachusetts, and I think it's like a national discussion, is so how do you get beyond that? Because you're never really going to get rid of recidivism. It's always going to be the John Q. public wants to know it's important, whether or not we're being effective and what the outcomes are. But the workforce ramifications are you can't have staff just showing up every day hoping something bad doesn't happen. You have to get staff to show up feeling like they're part of a constructive platform and that they're contributing. So that's been a big challenge for us, is to get out of that punitive headset that all we're here for today is to make sure there's no incidents, and to get staff really engaged in the change process, and relationships happen. Change happens in the context of relationships, and we have the benefit of having a very strong workforce. So those are two things that we've really spent a lot of time on, trying to get the young people's attention and get them on board with the fact that they can do better, and then getting staff to understand that they actually contribute. It's easier for teachers and clinicians because they're trained, in a discipline. It's much harder for us on the direct care piece, which is more nebulous. We're really trying to get out, because that's our biggest workforce, is the people that actually work the floor with the kids, and making sure that conversation is really healthy and contributing to the agency goals and big picture outcomes. So those are complex.
I want to take it even a little broader and wider and suggest that I think our biggest hurdle collectively, not only in Massachusetts but throughout the country, is in changing hearts and minds and how we handle these cases, how we process these cases, how we train our staff, how we understand about trauma, and how we do our work. In that it is very important to understand that there is a culture shift happening in Massachusetts and beyond. In fact, the federal government has responded, and I'm not going to talk about it now, but just to mention the Family First Act that has swept the nation, that will be implemented eventually in Massachusetts. But the underlying message in that is about community and collaboration and prevention. And how do we get ahead of this? And it's, none of us can solve it alone. The Department of Children and Families doesn't solve it alone. The education, probation, DCF, DYS, or attorneys. It's the community that has got to come together and identify issues with the family and support the family. And I was just at a meeting in Atlanta, that one of the most powerful voices in the room was the constituent voice, was a parent who had been through the system and a child that has been through the system. And the parent has now got her degree and is speaking nationally, and she was so impressive. And one of the things that she left the group with is that we need to bring back some humanity in the way, and not to say that we all don't treat people well, we do, but a sort of humanity in the system and how we handle system and speak to system-involved parents and youth, and a little bit what we all learned, or many of us in the education, leadership education program learned this morning about implicit bias. If you see somebody that's going through the system, that person has this, that, or the other thing. So
everybody in the room were paused and said, you know, it's a kinder, gentler world, in a world that isn't so kind and gentle and respectful, and being respectful of parents and being and the youth voice the same way. And it made me believe, I haven't talked to my colleagues about this as yet, that maybe even on the leadership forum we need a constituent voice. And because that's a big part of who we are and what we do. Oh, did I just get a huge? And of course it would be a collective decision, but I was so struck by it. And I know it instinctually, but just hearing it was like, oh my, yeah, we have to work stronger, work smarter.
So there may be other comments people want to have. That I want to make sure you have an opportunity. But let me just say, if people have questions, prepare, and we can get a mic to you so that you can ask questions.
So just real quick, the thing about work, you asked about challenges we face as going forward. The work harder, work smarter. So it's not all bad news, right? Because I have less than 600 kids, delinquents under supervision. Peter and I are veterans of literally Friday nights. We actually had a verb for it, crunching kids out, right? We had 80 kids living in gymnasiums that we closed by finding 80 kids and sending home. We used to go through this exercise every Friday night. We used to be triple bunked throughout the entire system. Every Friday night we went through an exercise of literally making space so that the kids getting off the vans, cuffed and shackled, would have places in the triple bunked system to stay. So that doesn't happen, right? So what we have come a long way is there are clinics, mental health clinics in every juvenile court in the Commonwealth. Our populations are down. We have, I give a lot of credit. So those kids, they went somewhere, right? And it's prenatal care, it's early intervention, it's the work that the schools are doing, hanging on to kids that they never used to hang on to. And so we have become a lot more sophisticated as a child serving system, and a lot more competent and capable, and but not done. And I think in some ways what we've done is we've refined it to an even more difficult and challenging group. And I think we need to, so it isn't so much, it used to be kind of, well, I wouldn't say it was easy, but it used to be like a different business. But now I think we need to match complexity with complexity. And we need to be more precise about defining what our problems are and fashioning those solutions. Because it isn't, triple bunk. You didn't need to walk into a GYS facility and, decide what the problem was. It was like, I thought we were going to be on 60 Minutes trying to explain what the hell we were doing. And, through hard work and through everybody that's represented here and lots of other people in the system, all of that isn't true anymore. But as Russell said, all of our problems haven't gone away. Sure. So anyway, so I think now the data really is key, because now we need to be much more surgical and much more precise about what our problems are and what our challenges are and how to fix them. So I'll leave it with that.
Let me open up to the audience for questions. Yes, over here.
I don't need a mic. Thank you. My name is Lorinda, and my question is for Russell. Yeah, okay. Russell, I want to know if you have any specific recommendations for professional development for our teachers, things like trauma-informed classroom procedures, and more generally procedures for our school districts, such as investing in school psychologists and or social workers to be in the schools in order to try to disrupt this cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that there's any one program necessarily that I would suggest, or one way of doing this. What we've actually been working on at the state level is to identify what are the practices that we want to see schools embrace. And so we have identified particularly, we call them turnaround practices. I've heard people tell me, call them school improvement practices. Had other people tell me just call it school, in terms of what we want to see happening to make this better. But the 4 practices are really about shared leadership. The first practice is about shared leadership. how do we make sure that it's a strong principle, but also a strong teacher voice in coming together to solve problems together. The second practice is about the instructional strategies. The third practice is around data to inform how we provide support, intervention, acceleration for students. And the fourth is about culture and climate, and that has a lot to do with culturally responsive practices and also the environment that we're creating for families. And if you look at our work, we really drive and support our schools in thinking deeply about how they embrace those four practices and how they make them their own. So that it's not something you buy off the shelf and a program that you think you can just implement and have magical outcomes. It's really about saying, if we can work on those four practices and have them work in concert with one another, we could get somewhere. And I think about the Burke High School in Boston as a great example, under Lindsay McIntyre's leadership as the principal of that building, about how they embraced those four practices and really created a much stronger learning environment for their students. We've published not only just a series of videos, but also some case studies about those practices. And so I would encourage you, if you're wanting to delve into that further, Google Turnaround Practices in Action is how we've publicized that information, and where you can get inside those case studies and videos and hear directly from teachers themselves about the types of things that they've done to embrace these changes to make in their practices from within their schools.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Hi there, my name is Philip Davis. I just have a quick question across the board. Many black and brown young men and women are disproportionately represented in many of the agencies. I just want to know what you guys are doing specifically to set them up for success once they transition out.
Transition out of the system.
Out of the system.
Yeah.
Let me just say that one thing, that very vulnerable age population of 17, 18, 19 years old that are oftentimes do not achieve a legal permanency in their life with a family or a guardian. And the courts are now, and I just read an astounding figure that those that have left the court system and were did not aged out, and that they're 18 years old, and that they also left the Department of Children and Families system and did not have a permanent home. Of that 20,000 or so that I read last year's statistic, that there was almost 50% within the following 18 months were homeless. And therein lies the difficulty for young people and not having that support and permanency. So the courts are working for all of the young people that come through the delinquency area or child welfare area. We're changing the way we look at that population and that cohort and ensure that our judges and probation, our court clinicians are there to support and provide the necessary means and tools that they need to survive, but also to ensure that no matter what their age, that we are able to find them a permanent home so they can be continually supported. Not easy, but it's a reason why we're changing the way we look at that age group. And they come into court as often as every 6 months now as they start to age out, so that we know, the judge will know what's happening in his or her life.
You know, one of the things, and Phil, I think Phil's aware of this, that what we're doing at DYS, one of the things that we did through strategic planning that actually started, Ed and I used to work together, if you haven't picked that up. It started when Ed was the boss. I have to publicly give him some credit for it. I'm not sure if it was his idea, but I think it was. But was to really jump on the voluntary services at the point of discharge. And we haven't looked at that through a racial lens, but the majority of the kids on a DYS caseload are minority kids, so it does benefit that. It's not an upstream strategy, it's more of a downstream strategy in the context of this. But the idea there is we're offering voluntary services at the point of discharge. In the calendar year 18, 56% of the kids that were discharging from the Department of Youth Services took us up on that voluntary. And so that's a group of kids that all came off the van against their will. And a year or 2 years later, they're saying, Yeah, I think, I would like to remain involved in services because I need help with, whether it's housing, just straight case management and guidance and coaching, or, you know, we're doing things like paying for, driver's ed, pair of boots if you need it. We're supporting community college placements for kids. And so it's kind of like, whatever you would do for your own 18, 19-year-old, we're doing for these 18, 19-year-olds, because a lot of them are coming out of households where they don't have that resource. And I talked to John Zaff a little bit about this before. We have like the flip metric, which is recidivism, and the young people that are opting in are doing much better at the 6 month and 1 year mark on recidivism than the kids that are opting out. So intuitively you would understand that, but it's a big piece, and it's not gonna solve and it's definitely not really directly taking on the race issue as much as really looking out for a group of disadvantaged young people. And I'll close on the way we've been messaging some of that has been, you know, we're in the good decision business, and that's a good decision. So if a young person is ready to make a good decision, how do we step in behind that and work with them to make sure that we capitalize on that opportunity? Because that opportunity might not come back around if they go through that homelessness cycle and through, you know, all of the craziness that can happen to an 18, 19-year-old without support, particularly for kids that are coming out of the system. So that's one piece.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, I'm Claudia Dunn. I'm just wondering, no one up here particularly is working with the 0 to 5 population, but we're going to talk prevention, and, you know, having read thousands of evals over my years, that's where you start to see it. And how are we going to start doing real prevention and giving support to families really early on, and stop misdiagnosing kids with ADHD and bipolar disorder and where there's trauma. So I don't know, it's not in anyone's purview here per se, but I'm wondering what's happening on that level.
It is actually, and that we talk about it often in the courts as well, and I've reviewed across the country some models that we might be able to employ in Massachusetts on a 0 to 3 court. And I know one of our first justices is interested in doing a pilot in this area, and you're absolutely right. That's why that prevention rather than the intervention early on, that model is very important, and that is a cohort that we are looking at to pay attention to and to ensure that if they are in the system, that it is a short time in the system, and that will be on an early track or an early pathway in the court. But thank you for bringing that up. It's very important.
I think that I always get to talk about the happier stuff. Like, it's not so much in the system as it is in school. And so really one of the things that we are looking to see what we can do is to figure out how can we create more universal preschool options for our youngest children, particularly 4-year-olds. How can we offer more universal options? So I look to the work, for example, that's happening in the districts that have the preschool expansion grants, and districts like Holyoke, for example, where we are figuring out ways to work together with EEC and thinking about what are the, you know, in terms of just the same sort of thing that goes on year around, what are the requirements that both agencies have? How can we make them meld and blend together a little bit better so that we actually can work to have universal preschool options available for families, and really make sure that we are supporting and getting our children when they're the most valuable and the most wonderful to support. So I'm excited about, for example, in Holyoke, the way in which there are more preschool options right within the public schools, working with community partners, and I'm hopeful that that model can continue to grow. I think there's some other great examples from across the state, but I just point out Holyoke is one good example of where it's growing.
Mike, yeah, I just want to return to something that Chief Justice Nectar said earlier too about the Federal Family First Act. This is a brand new approach that the feds are taking to funding child welfare services, which is a sea change. Up until for the last 40 years or so, federal funding has been available largely for foster care and substitute care and nothing else. And the new federal law is gonna provide the same level of matching grants to states for prevention services. And it's just a matter of getting states to jump in. It's a challenging regime that the feds have set up, but it is a tremendous opportunity for us to create community-based services that are gonna make the need for our work, actually on this side of the table, Russell's always gonna have a job. But I mean, my hope is that it's gonna create far less of a demand for our lawyers, for DYS, for probation in the court, and hopefully, you know, add to the work being done in places like the family resource centers that are community-based now. I think we just need to get more and more services into the communities, and the Family First Act is one way that we can, hopefully with the legislature stepping up and the DCF stepping up, we can see that happen.
So join me in thanking the panel. I think it's very hopeful what the work you've done, the potential successes ahead. I think you captured it right. Might say, you know, minimize the impact of what's happening on this side of the table. It's really exciting. What can be done in our state. So we do have refreshments outside. There's a chance for you to interact with folks a little bit. I know some people need to get ahead of traffic if that's possible, but thank you again for being here.
What a pleasure. I appreciate it. Thanks so much for being here.